Good morning, everyone, and great to see so many young people at this Next Gen conference. And I wish you a very inspiring 2 days. And the start of my speech, for some of you will sound very young, and for others maybe already very old. Because I was 2 years old when the Berlin Wall fell. And like most people of my generation, I grew up with the idea that global democracy would eventually win out, and world peace was within our grasp. Fukuyama's vision of the future, the end of history, was deeply ingrained in the Netherlands of that time, and in me as well. But it was until September 11th, 2001. And I remember how I spent that endless day in front of the TV, watching over and over again in disbelief as 2 planes flew into the Twin Towers. And I remember the months that followed as Fukuyama's promise quickly unraveled. Instead of world peace, we got conflict, terrorism, war. At first, it seemed far away, at least through my young eyes. But this new world quickly seemed much closer when I found myself with American classmates in school whose parents were stationed at the airbase in Volkel, Brabant. Later, it seemed still closer, as family and friends in the armed forces were sent to Afghanistan. And as I saw the effects of this long conflict in the self-image and the position in society of so many fellow Muslim countrymen. And it was my experience of watching the end of history crumble in the face of real history. In the years since, the world has only become less safe and more unpredictable. And we in the Netherlands and Europe need to respond. For many people, I think it was only in 2022, when Russia began its all-out war against Ukraine, that the penny really dropped. But the truth is, reality had already hit us long before that. It hit us in 2014, when flight MH17 was drowned by a Russian missile and Putin invaded Crimea. That's when the war in Ukraine really started. And it hit us again in 2016 when the first Trump administration started pushing Europe much harder towards fair burden sharing in NATO. The change in tone from the US towards Europe did not happen overnight. And for several years now, we've been hit by the reality of strong men around the world mocking democracy and the rule of law and playing games with peace and prosperity in our region. And if the last few years have taught us anything, it's that our security relies not only on military strength, but also on economic dependencies, cybersecurity, and technology. So we must reflect on where we want to be in 10, 20 years. And since geopolitical developments are largely still determined by a small number of older men, it's vital that the voices of young people are heard loud and clear, as is the case today and tomorrow, here in The Hague. And the future does not belong to the powers that be, but to the generations to come. So I truly applaud this initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, we just saw it in a great introduction video. The Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney recently spoke his mind in Davos. And he held up a mirror to us all. He basically said that we, the middle powers in the West, have to get our act together, whether we like it or not. As he put it, nostalgia is not a strategy. And I think we can all agree on that. Foreign policy must be grounded in realism, in a pragmatic assessment of what's happening in the here and now, and where our own interests lie. And with that in mind, I'd like to discuss 3 principles that are at the heart of the Dutch foreign and defense policy in the coming years. 1, for reasons both principle and practical, we must remain fully committed to the rule of law and the international legal order. And it's a shame that nowadays you have to clap for that. 2, we must renew the transatlantic security architecture in order to preserve its strength and relevance. And 3, the Netherlands and Europe must forge new partnerships and renew existing ones. And I mentioned the rule of law and the international legal order first for a reason. They are not abstract concepts or hobby horses of a few privileged countries. On the contrary, they are the foundation on which our society rests. Our freedom, our security, our democracy, and our prosperity. And Article 90 of the Dutch Constitution literally requires the government to, and I quote, promote the development of the international legal order. And here in The Hague, the international city of peace and justice, we feel this responsibility deeply. But our commitment to the international legal order is also a matter of enlightened self-interest. Because the post-war history of the EU and NATO shows that international cooperation and the rule of law produce strong economies and high trust quality of life. Because people and businesses that feel free, secure, and protected are more inclined to invest in their future and together build strong societies. And yes, upholding the international legal order also means calling out countries to account, adversaries and allies alike. And of course, ideally, this should be done within the institutions like the United Nations, NATO, the European Union, and the International Court of Justice. Institutions that together form the post-war rules-based world order. And today we live in an age in which a small number of states use violence or the threat of violence to get their way. And also an age in which many countries no longer accept being judged by Western countries. And it doesn't mean we need to have fewer principles and ideals, but it does mean we need to be realistic about what we can achieve. And we must make sure that the end result is in everyone's interest and not just our own. Because if we worry that countries in the global south are turning towards China and Russia, then we also need to look at our own role in that process. For too long, other perspectives have not been recognized, or at least they haven't been given sufficient weight, leaving many countries empty-handed. And it's time for us to acknowledge this and take action, so that the rule of law works for everyone, and we strengthen not only ourselves, but each other. And for that, I believe we need a pragmatic approach. In the international arena, as in life, being right and getting your way are often two different things. The Finnish president, Alexander Stubb, coined the term values-based realism for this. And I fully endorse the idea behind it. You need to know where you stand morally, and at the same time accept that you can't always choose who you do business with and how. Take Iran, for example. The Dutch government has been very clear that the attack on Iran was a violation of international law. At the same time, the Iranian regime poses a nuclear hazard to the world, is a major threat to peace and stability in the region, and has been extremely brutal and oppressive to its own people. And we must recognize both sides of the coin. Is that an awkward position? Perhaps it is. But it's also the reality we face, so we must be realistic. And it brings me to the next point. We must renew the transatlantic security architecture to preserve its strength and relevance. For far too long, Europe has clung to the naive notion that we can shelter under the US security umbrella forever at little cost. And we also can't ignore the impact of US tariff policy on economic cooperation. And there's no denying that the tone of our old friends across the Atlantic towards Europe has become harsher and more critical. Now we probably all have our own views on that. But I don't believe that getting upset or feeling offended will get us anywhere. Because victimhood is not helpful, and it's also not necessary. We should bear in mind that the roots of the transatlantic relationship go far deeper than one presidential term. So we should think and act with a view for the decades ahead. And that starts with taking a good look at ourselves. And the bottom line is this: the Netherlands and Europe must take more responsibility for their own security. we must step up the plate. We need to boost European defense cooperation to ensure we can defend our own continent. And we must do so not to distance ourselves from the US, but to make the alliance more equal and, as a result, stronger. And my government's coalition agreement clearly states that NATO remains the cornerstone of Dutch security policy, because the US is and will remain the global power with which we share the most values and interests. And they are mutual interests: economic, military, and geopolitical. It's not a one-way street. We depend on each other. So in the long run, we all stand to benefit from future-proofing the transatlantic relationship. And as I've said in the past, Europe must learn to speak the language of power. When we tell each other that keeping over 1 billion people safe is a collective effort and a collective responsibility, that should mean something. It should mean taking the next steps together, consciously and systematically working towards a stronger European dimension within NATO. Not because our biggest ally demands it of us, but because we want to pull our own weight and stand on our own 2 feet. And that's not rocket science. In fact, we are already on this path. Just look at the first German-Netherlands Corps, which has its headquarters in Münster. Or look at the Joint Expeditionary Force, a military coalition in which the United Kingdom, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, the Baltic states, and the Netherlands holds joint military exercises over land and sea and in the air. And the JEF is designed to defend the northern flank of NATO, including Greenland. And not too long ago, such a coalition of NATO members outside NATO structures would have been unthinkable. But new realities call for new approaches. And take, for example, public-private cooperation in Europe's defense industry and defense capabilities, which has already taken flight in recent years. Take the efforts to boost Europe's role in nuclear deterrence within NATO, a subject on which the Netherlands is engaging in a strategic dialogue with France. Take the determination with which the coalition of the willing is working on security guarantees for Ukraine outside the existing structures. And of course, there's the warp speed increase in national defense spending, including in our own country, with the Netherlands laying down the 3.5% defense spending target in legislation. And all these plans, initiatives, and efforts will ultimately give Europe a stronger and a more equal position in NATO. This will make us all safer and more resilient against existing and future threats. And that's good for us, for Europe, for the United States, and therefore for the NATO as a whole. And now let's be realistic. Will all this go smoothly and without a hitch? Of course not. The stakes are way too high for that. Will it be achieved overnight? No, that's impossible. But are things changing as we speak? Yes, they certainly are. And not just when it comes to defense. Which brings me to my third and final point. When the world's major powers put their own interest, above all the else, the Netherlands and Europe should respond by forging new partnerships and renew existing ones. In this new geopolitical era, I'm convinced that building new coalitions is the key. We must not close doors, but open them. And as I've said, we need to understand and acknowledge the perspective of countries in the global south. Or as the Indian Minister of External Affairs put it, Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. And there's truth in that observation. So if we want to strengthen our economies by reducing our dependency on major players and boosting cooperation with other countries, we need to consider not only what we stand to gain, but also what we have to offer. And that's a lot. The strength of our union has always been that it is both a community of values and an economic powerhouse. The rule of law meets the largest single market in human history. And that's what makes us so attractive to all those countries seeking memberships and to partners around the world. The EU has knowledge and innovation to offer, a wide range of high-tech and other companies, a long tradition of legal certainty and social stability, financial muscle and purchasing power, a well-educated workforce, and much more besides. So we have a lot to bring to the table. And as it is, new partnerships can take many forms and cover many topics, and positions can change. An obvious example is the prospect of Ukraine's EU membership in the future. Yes, the Copenhagen criteria must be applied, there can be no doubt about that, but Ukraine's future lies in the European Union. And it's now on an irreversible path to that future. And everyone in Europe can also be thankful for that. As the war in Ukraine goes on and the Russian threat towards the West grows, we should recognize the advantages of having a capable and battle-hearted partner on the eastern flank of the Union that has been defending our values for so long. And another obvious example is the recent EU trade deals with India, Australia, and the Mercosur countries. Besides their many benefits, these agreements send at least 3 implicit messages to other countries. Firstly, that the world doesn't need higher tariffs. It needs lower ones, or even better, none at all. And secondly, that international cooperation is not a zero-sum game. It benefits all partners. And thirdly, that countries and regions working together through trade agreements are more inclined to maintain peaceful relations. And a final example concerns the fact that geopolitical power increasingly means technological power. Wars are no longer won solely on the battlefield with tanks and guns. In today's world, technology equals security. So we cannot leave the global race for leadership in AI, semiconductors, and quantum computing solely to China and a few US tech giants. Thanks to ASML and our wider semiconductor system, the Netherlands holds a unique position in this regard. And in our quest to find new partners, we recently reached a key milestone when we announced a strategic partnership between the Netherlands and India. India is set to invest big sums to gain control of 10% of the global semiconductor value chain. And ASML and the Netherlands are set to play a major role in this, and it's new coalitions like these that will prepare us for the future. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as the world keeps turning, the next gen steps up to the plate. The Netherlands has a big role to play in all these changes that are taking place, and we want to take up that role. As one of the 6 founding members of the EU, and as host country to so many international institutions, we feel we have a responsibility to be at the helm. And I firmly believe that we can protect our security, our freedom, and our prosperity when we act on the basis of values-driven realism, uphold the rule of law, and build coalitions worldwide. Not as a choice, but as a necessity and a moral duty to future generations. And therefore, I'm counting on you, the next Jenners, to roll up your sleeves. Because, as we've learned the hard way, history did not end, and now it's asking a new generation to take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech and for kicking off the conference. We'll now move on to Q&A with the audience. A few ground rules. If you have a question, please raise your hand. If I give you the question, you can stand up, briefly mention who you are, and keep the question short and sweet. Everyone, I welcome the audience. Raise your hands. Jana. A microphone will come to you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Jana Rudenko, and I lived here in the Netherlands for 3 years, and I assume, like, I perceived the Netherlands as my second home. And today, as I the first one speaking and asking the question, it won't be the question. When my friends, and I have many friends that are Ukrainian soldiers, they knew that I come into this event, they just told me, Jana, say thank you to Dutch people. So today I want to say thank you to Dutch people and our Prime Minister here, because often when I lived here, I always criticize the Netherlands and Dutch people, and we need to support Ukraine, fight, we need to be active. But today, after I lived 11 months in Ukraine, actually I want to say that thank you, and you have something to be proud of. And you have that power to take responsibility and own things and be a leader in Europe. So that's what I want to give you, like today, as a message, because you have that power, and I see that power from the perspective of Ukraine. So thank you for that. And of course, here for promotion, I'm co-founder of Dronate Collective, and I would like to give you a patch. And after, let's take a photo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. Are there any other questions from the audience? Let's see. In the front here, the lady. Here, over there.
Thank you very much for this really inspiring talk. My name is Theresa Kuhn. I'm professor of European politics at the University of Amsterdam. I agree with you. We should really think about redefining the relationship with the United States. However, I'm wondering how this is currently possible. Is it really about changes just for one election term, or are we actually seeing changes that are, having a much longer term, democratic backsliding? And how do we actually deal with a president who is moving really away from us? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, how do you deal with him? By engaging with him and speaking truth to him. I had the privilege, together with the King and Queen, to have a 4-hour dinner with him. We literally discussed every topic that's on the front pages nowadays. And we didn't agree on a lot. But we had a very frank debate on it, with arguments going back and forth, especially over Ukraine. And the only way to try to change a little bit of, I think, the policies there and the decision-making is to make sure that there are Europeans at the table, bringing in the European perspective. Otherwise, it's a very narrow-minded perspective from a very few thinkers in the United States, and that is not in our interest. So keeping engaging with him, even if you disagree with the United States president on a lot of topics, is, in my opinion, crucial. But it's also engaging with a lot of other Americans. During my visit in DC, I had a very long conversation also with congressmen from both sides of the aisle on NATO, on semiconductor policies, on the power of big tech. And it was a very interesting conversation with both Republicans and Democrats that are working on new pieces of legislation and that were much more on the European page than we sometimes expect if you just follow the news here in Europe. But even if there is a new president after Trump, being a Republican or a Democrat, we shouldn't expect the US to go back to their NATO policies where they've been, or we shouldn't expect the US to engage much more with the European Union, because I think this is a trend that is irreversible in many ways. And that's why I'm also a little bit, how would you say that, eager when I'm at the European Council. Because I'm the new kid on the block in the European Council, and I'm really trying to spice it up a little bit. Because come on, people, let's have some more self-confidence. This is the biggest market of the world. This is the only continent where the rule of law is the foundation of a great society. Everyone wants to live here. Everyone wants to work here. Everyone wants to have a European passport. So show some self-determination and some pride of being Europeans. Step up the game and make sure that we are the best continent to live on.
Let's see, another question. The man in the front here, in the middle.
Hello, I'm Adrian from Leiden University. Glad to be here and thank you for inspiring words, especially about Europe. Always like to hear it. So obviously, as you laid out in your speech, Europe needs to focus a bit more on its activeness on the international stage, and I fully agree here. But activeness in the past has been very limited by the EU's reluctance on common debt and in its reluctance to gather the necessary funds for future investments and stuff. And the Netherlands has traditionally been a country, a proponent of this quote-unquote responsible fiscal policy. Under your leadership, will this change, and will the European Union be equipped with the funds it needs to tackle the challenges we face? Thank you.
It's a good question, and it's going to be a very interesting negotiations on the next European budget in the months to come. I wouldn't expect a very big change on European loans, because if you look at the power balance in the Dutch parliament, it's quite a big majority that is actually very critical of it. But my personal view is also, money is not the problem. We need to finalize the European Capital Markets Union to make sure that all this private money is actually going into the right direction. And there's enough money in national budgets and in the European budget to do what we have to do. We just need to focus it on the right things. And the right things nowadays is combating climate change together, boosting the innovation in our big industries and tech sectors to make sure that we are more independent on all these crucial innovations and technologies that we will need in the decades to come, and to invest together in our defense capabilities. If you add up all the national budgets in Europe spending on our armies, it is more than enough to be the strongest army in the world. But we have to spend it wisely. Instead of buying 80 different types of arms and 10 different types of tanks that cannot even be interchanged, that is ridiculous. And it is also very bad news for taxpayers all around Europe that just want to have a powerful army for the Europeans to protect this continent. So in the end, this geopolitical question that you're raising is not about European debts. It's about the willingness and the political leadership to make sure that the funds are going into the right policies, and that we also abolish some of the European rulings that we have that are now actually holding us back. So on foreign policies, it is, I think, for everyone extremely frustrating that if there is a new conflict or a new war and a new escalation in the Middle East, Europeans need 2, 3, 4 meetings in Brussels to discuss whether we can come up to a common position, and then we can't. And if we do, it's vague, and everyone started treating something differently. So if you want to be a geopolitical powerhouse, you need strong European foreign policies, and I think that's much more important than having some loans together. Yes, thank you.
A questioner slightly behind the flowers for the man over there.
Good morning to you all. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome, great that you're here. Thanks for your speech, and compliments to the organizers for this great lineup. This is about the next generation. My name is Jean-Pierre Kempeneers, former Dutch diplomat and former board member of Nexperia. This is about the next generation. This is about security as a whole, as you said yourself. Enhancing resilience is a very important element of security. I would very much appreciate hearing your views on introducing conscription. So military service, social service for men and women, they can choose. It would have so many benefits. It would, of course, enhance our resilience. It would also narrow the gaps in society. It would provide for more workforce to reduce shortages in the healthcare sector, and the same goes for education. So your views on conscription. Thank you.
I'm also very curious about the thoughts of the next gens in the room. So maybe that's something to discuss later today. Well, at the moment, if you look at the number of men and women we need in our national army, it's actually going quite well. So we don't need conscription to add up the numbers that we need in the years to come. And for now, I would like actually people that are all by themselves choosing a career in our national army. I think that is the way forward for the years to come. Also to make sure that we have all the capacity and capabilities to train and educate these people to become professionally military men and women in what kind of job they aspire in our national army. But would like to say two other things. One is if you look at safety, security, and readiness. We had a very long debate last year here in the Netherlands about this emergency package. Which one of you has an emergency package at home? Oh, not bad. It's more than the average in the country, but still. Still not half of the room. And the emergency package is not going to, it's going to help you in the first 2 days of a big crisis, but it's not going to save us in the end. And when I visit Nordic countries, for example, I'm always very much inspired and a little bit jealous on how millions of people in those countries are well prepared for any kind of crisis, being a hybrid threat or a violent aggression against the country. So we need to rethink also how we prepare our society for situations without internet, without electricity, or even with aggression. And maybe talking about it more could help. Maybe conscription could be part of the solution, but not completely sure. And what is, I think, in the end, important for the resilience of this generation is much more than my generation. You grew up with technology, with social media, with everything online. And we thought it's going to be amazing. The world is going to be on my phone and I can meet new people and explore the world. I think nowadays, this generation is also finding out that this internet era and social media platforms can also be a threat to your own identity, to the way that you engage with others, to polarizing society. So if we want to be more resilient as a society, I think we also need to engage much more with this generation and ask them, how are we going to cope with this age of social media and disinformation online?
I think we have time for one more question. I'd like to have a young person ask the question.
No offense, Jean-Pierre.
Let's see. All the way in the back over there on the right? Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Felix Weinlinger. I work at the Carnegie Foundation right over there. And one of the previous people who were asking a question was on obligatory military service. I'm actually doing a form of social service right here at the Carnegie Foundation. I'm originally from Austria. And I'm here for 10 months. And I feel it's an incredible opportunity. And personally, I'm pro military service, or more pro, or how I should say, pro-choice, that you can choose between social service and military service. So I feel it's an incredible opportunity as a young person to do this sort of thing. But that's not related to my question. What I actually want to get at is, of course, I work right next to the International Court of Justice. So the idea and the principles of human rights and the rule of law are very important to me. And also, the work of international courts and tribunals in The Hague is also important to me, and I'm deeply disturbed by the fact that there are a lot of threats through other nations. A lot of nations are sanctioning judges, international judges, and staff members of international courts and tribunals. And I want to ask what we as Europeans and as what the Netherlands and the EU can do against those sanctions, those threats, to uphold not just our own rule of law in our own nations, but international rule of law. Mm. Thank you very much.
And I'm very happy that you've raised that question, because I think a lot of people also here in the Netherlands are not aware of the threats against international institutions that are based here in The Hague and in the Netherlands. We've seen completely unacceptable sanctions and measures against individuals, for example, working at these institutions that are being actually harassed and almost unable to just live a normal life without bank accounts and all these kind of stuff. So what we do as the Netherlands is always address these kind of measures as completely unacceptable to the ones that are responsible for it, and also together with other countries in Europe making sure that we find workarounds so that people can do their very important job. But now over the past few weeks we've also seen some insinuations that there can be sanctions against the institutions as a whole. Which would be an axe to the foundation of the international legal order, which is so crucial at this time of history. And you should also ask yourselves, why are countries hinting that they are willing to do so? It is, in the end, as I've said at the beginning of my speech, because some people think that using violence or the threat of violence makes them more powerful and gets them the opportunity to push aside other countries, the middle powers, to get what they want. And we have to make sure that we do not accept this. So this is a responsibility for the Netherlands, for me as the Prime Minister, but also for all other EU member states to really stand together and to show that we are shoulder to shoulder to protect these international institutions as the sole foundation of the international legal order. And we have to be much more outspoken about it and do whatever we can to prevent this. So thank you very much for your very important question.
I think we'll do one more question. I think we have some extra time. There's someone who's been raising their hand the whole time, all the way in the back as well. Over there, yes.
Yeah, he's been.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Is the microphone working?
Here you are.
Thank you so much. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez commented on the Rearm Europe package that the Russian tanks aren't attacking through the Pyrenees, but climate change is. To what extent do you support his call to earmark the 800 billion euros for climate adaptation and mitigation?
I think the first part of his remark was naive, and the second part is completely right. So the Russian threat is not a threat to Ukraine. It's a threat to each and everyone in Europe. And I've never seen such a resilient people as the Ukrainians that over the past few years have endured so much aggression and have found a way to actually stop the Russian invasion and to fight back. It's very inspiring. But at the same time, the Russians are using hybrid threats to several countries in Europe. Look at the Baltics, look at Poland, but also look here in the Netherlands, what they're trying to do to influence us online. And they're also not scared away to attack our crucial infrastructure. In the end, that's going to hurt each and everyone in Europe, also the people in Spain. But yes, next to aggressive regimes and authoritarian leaders, there's another very big threat to our security and especially to this generation, and that's called climate change. Climate change is already affecting millions of people around the world, not solely in small island states, but in many, many countries. And this part of the world, Northwestern Europe and the Iberian Peninsula, including the Caribbean region, are the two regions that are already mostly affected, with 1.5 degrees global warming, with huge impact on food security, big ask for climate adaptation, and look at what we've been to in the past few weeks with high energy prices and the impact that the Strait of Hormuz has on our economies and on so many households that are now struggling to pay the bills. So if we want to have a secure and prosperous Europe, we need to step up the game and make sure that we can defend our own continent. And I would love to see Spain finally being part of the countries spending enough on defense and do it also jointly so we can protect our own continent. But I agree also with Pedro Sanchez that we need to do more to tackle climate change and to prepare ourselves with more climate adaptation. And in the end, if we don't want to be over-dependent on the Middle East, Russia or other countries, we need to make sure that we have our own energy policy in place, that we have technology and companies that are providing us with circular solutions, that we invest in more forest and more nature-based solutions to protect ourselves against extreme heat or floodings. So we have to do both. We have to spend on defense, and we have to do more to tackle climate change. And that's also what I told Pedro Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. We won't keep you any longer. We know you have a busy schedule, but thank you so much for joining us, and please give him another final round of applause.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah.